caused by addiction to alcohol, leading to a deterioration in health and social functioning.
Social functioning, that's very interesting. Because what it actually does physically, and this is what I wrote down, alcohol dulls the parts of your brain that control how your body works. It dulls the part of your brain that controls how your body works. This affects your actions, your ability to make decisions, and even staying in control of yourself. Self-control, right, for the spirit. Alcohol influences your mood and can also make you feel down or aggressive. As the concentration of alcohol in your bloodstream increases, so the more drinks you have, your behavior and body functions begin to change. At first, you may feel happy and less inhibited, but after several drinks, you'll probably slur your words, you get blurred vision, and you lose your coordination. There's no immediate way to sober up. It takes time for your body to process the alcohol. The morning after of heavy nights of drinking, you're likely to have a high concentration of alcohol in your bloodstream. An incredible glimpse into just this lifestyle, if you've never experienced it before, is the movie The Blind, the story of Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty. They show this process of somebody that starts drinking and then gets addicted. Phenomenal movie. I just highly recommend it. I'm also a huge fan of Duck Dynasty. I mean, the beards. So, but I like their story. I like how Phil Robertson came to Christ, and then you saw the generational change of drinking into a Christian family.
And he doesn't hold back. I mean,
they leave everything in this
everything.
movie.
Yeah.
So go watch The Blind if you haven't watched it yet. Great movie. But it just gives this glimpse into what it looks like to really go down this road of starting to drink and then becoming an alcoholic, and how that changes everything in that. But we're going to share a story for just the next few moments, just who we are, to give you some background of where we're coming from and all of this. So I'll let my dad start, because it starts with his story and then goes into my story.
So, I was born in Seattle, and my folks got divorced a couple times, but the final time, my mom, an alcoholic, was not taking care of us kids while my dad was in the Merchant Marines, and he would be gone a lot. So my grandmother and my aunt would come see us and report back to my dad that my mom was having men over and drinking, not taking care of us at all. So he quit the Merchant Marines, divorced, took us to California to live with my grandfather, who owned a bar. And yeah, I was 7, my brother was 9, and my sister was a little older. And my dad went to work for him. That's why we ended up down there by San Bernardino, about 50 miles east of LA. Yeah, got my Dodger hat on. And he went to work in the bar. Well, I have pictures of my mom and my dad. My dad was in his uniform, and they were out at these dances in Seattle. And you could tell they were both drinking, having a good time, but you could tell, their big eyes were looking like this. And his girlfriend, after they got divorced, went down to California with him. They got married and opened a bar. So it's kind of been in my blood. I started working there when I was probably 12, and he sold it when I was 25. I washed dishes, I cooked, I tended bar later on, and eventually managed the place. And everybody I grew up with, their parents all came into this tavern, and then eventually it was a cocktail lounge restaurant. And social drinking, most of them. But there were some that were just alcoholics, you could tell. And I'm growing up watching this, of course. My folks are drinking in the house. They would have people over from the tavern, and they would go out to dinner, and me and my buddies would finish off all the drinks, that were left there. It just kind of grew and grew until I went in the Army, and then we drank. That's one of the things we did. Vietnam, we drank a lot. then that's where drugs kind of started coming in. Pot, there's a lot of heroin over there. I never really did it myself, but there were a lot of guys that did. So when I got back from there, I went to work for my dad, tending bar. And my brother was working there, and then they got in a big fight. My brother was doing drugs. I got into doing the drugs with him. We drank a lot. Never missed any work because of that. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm not drinking so much that I can't go to work. You know, Dennis and I, my brother and I used to talk about it, and he just loved to drink, and it just kind of, I did what he did what my dad did, and my dad never communicated with me anything about alcohol. My stepmom was an alcoholic. My dad, again, he drank a lot, but he functioned very well. He ran a great bar. It was a family bar. We all hung out there. But eventually, my mom got pretty bad, you know, with police coming to the house. She's calling the police on my dad because she's having hallucinations and stuff from the alcohol. And it got pretty bad. My brother ended up going in the Army at 17. There was some physical altercations in our house caused by alcohol. And as soon as I graduated, I wanted out of there. I didn't want to be in that environment. So I went in the Army, and we drank. That's what we did in the Army, you know. And then Vietnam drugs and things. And when I got out, I went to work at the bar, and I drank for the next 40 years. Got to the point where my liver was getting scarred. And I gotta get a little drink of water here. My mouth gets dry.
That's how pastors feel every Sunday.
And Cory's, you know, I'm married now. For the second time, met both my wives in bars. You met your wife. Yeah.
We'll get to that.
So, Cory came along. Not only was I hanging out in bars, I was playing in a band. Bars. It's 5-6 nights a week. And of course, give the band a round, you know, and all these drinks are coming up, and yeah, we're having a good time. So that went on for quite a while. And then I finally became a mailman when I turned 50. I can't really drink when you're delivering the mail, but afterwards, I had favorite haunts I would stop at on the way home. Cory's now getting ready to graduate right about that time. I think I'm hiding it, you know, when he's younger. Well, come to find out,
I was hiding it.
He was hiding it, yeah. So, I didn't quit drinking until we moved here when I was 65. We were still, to back up a bit, Cory started going to church because his wife's family went to church. Then he said, "Dad, we need a guitar player on our worship team," you know. So that's kind of how I started going to church. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I can go to play guitar. That's what I like to do. That's my hobby. Well, that's, yeah. He starts reeling me in, you know, and thank goodness. I quit in time where my liver regenerated. I don't really have any lingering problems from it. Thank goodness. It could have been bad. My brother died at 43, my dad at 70. I'm sure alcohol had a lot to do with that. But then you wonder, is it environment? Is it hereditary? Is it peer pressure? I think it's a little bit of all those things. But as a little aside, when I was 45 years old, I found out I had another brother. Grew up in eastern Montana, at a place called Wolf Point. Some of you might know the place. Grew up on a 2,000-acre farm. He was adopted when he was just a few days old. Same mom, same dad. So when we finally got together, he grew up in a different environment completely. Different parents that didn't drink, went to church. He liked a beer now and then, but that was pretty interesting. We grew up in entirely different places. He grew up on a farm in Montana, and I grew up in a bar in Fontana. You know, that's kind of the story. But he died last year. He was 75. Lived longer than any other male in my family, going back several generations. And I'm sure alcohol had a lot to do with it. My uncle was an alcoholic, died early. His wife, my dad's cousin, my aunt, just the entire family. So is that hereditary, coming from the same Park family that we all came from? Is it environment? My brother kind of proved that, yeah, maybe it is a lot to do with the environment. But thank goodness Cory invited us here to North Dakota. And we started going to Evangel, and there it is. So there's a lot more I could say, but we only have an hour here. So.
Continuing that story, in high school, he mentioned that I saw him drinking and partying with his friends, and so I started doing it. This is what social norm is. So I started sneaking the alcohol because I was, 16, 17 years old. And I remember stealing it from you. I'd pour your whiskey, which was like terrible. What 16-year-old, was in the right mindset? I'm gonna steal a whiskey, and then I'd fill it with water. I probably never told you that, but I'm thinking I'm hiding it, and then it just became my lifestyle. And then I left for college. We were in Seattle. I left for college. Went to Phoenix, Arizona for automotive college because I wanted to be a mechanic. Boy, you put 4 teenagers in a 2-bedroom apartment in college. It was the Wild West in that apartment. So we had keggers, we had, just huge parties. We'd get drunk every weekend. There's times I don't even remember things that would happen. I'd wake up in different places and that kind of lifestyle. And it just wore on me really quick. I felt like I aged a few years in just a matter of a year. I ended up moving back home to Seattle because I wanted to be a Ford mechanic, and there was a school there that did that specialty. So I started going to that school, got right back into the same lifestyle. Just fell right back into this environment because of my friends. Turned 21, oh man, now we can go to bars and do this all the time. So I was going to a bar every night of the week. We had places we'd go with our friends where it'd be on sale over here, cheaper over there, so we do different things. And I was in and out of relationships that were very toxic, and met my wife now at one of these bars on a Tuesday night, and she walked in, and I had met her before. She had dated one of my friends in high school, so we had met at one point. I thought she was really attractive, and I was dating this girl on and off, and so I had enough liquid courage in me to go up and ask this girl for a number, and she remembered me, and she had enough liquid courage in her where she gave me her number. I texted her that night, broke up with my girlfriend that night, started dating this girl the next day. And terrible advice. But a few months later, she introduced me to her family, who were Christians attending the Assemblies of God Church in Tacoma, Washington. And I wanted to be the good boyfriend, so I went and met her parents, and a pastor there said, "Hey, we're planting a campus. Will you come check out this church?" And they were family friends. So we said, "Yeah, I wanted to be the good boyfriend." So I went to this church, got radically saved on the first Sunday. My wife grew up in a house that was Christian and rebelled completely. And we'll get to that toward later. But then I grew up in a different environment, but we both had heard the gospel. It was like on that Sunday morning, and it radically changed our lifestyle. We got rid of all of our friends. We changed everywhere we went every night of the week, and started going to church every night of the week and doing things in the church because they were a church plant. And it was just this lifestyle. But really, just because we changed our environment and our friends, there was still an addiction there. And I very much looked forward to it after work. I worked construction. Then at this point, I left being a mechanic, went and did construction. and you were drinking, so we'd get together on the weekends and we'd still drink, even though I'm trying to change my life, but I still had that addiction to it. And I liked a beer after work, or football on, you know, Sunday nights. We'd have some friends over, and one of my good friends and mentors, we were renting, he was our landlord. He had a couple beers once in a while on the weekend, and we just kind of like, oh, it must be still okay, even though, you know, it seems like it's not, but other people are, so it must still be okay. So we really got into this lifestyle of saved by grace, but not realizing everything that was still taking place in our life. And I was leading, you know, we were still drinking a lot. And there were several times as a Christian, I remember getting drunk because one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. And I'd be lying if I didn't say to this day, and my lead pastor, Pastor Josh, knows this, superintendent knows this, it's still a thought, an addiction. There's still a craving to drink. Even though, like, I know all the complications of it, it's still an urge for me because I did it for so long. And really, for us, both of our lifestyles, we were exposed to this environment of drinking and that it was socially acceptable. And seeing our parents drink gave us both permission in our life. And I slowed down a lot as I became a Christian longer and longer because I realized it wasn't good. Nothing good is coming from this. And ultimately, you know, I started living for something greater than myself. You know, there's different things I wanted to accomplish in life. The longer I was married, eventually we moved to North Dakota. And I completely stopped drinking because I really changed my environment then. I lived with my in-laws when we first moved to Bismarck. And so they don't drink at all. So we kind of had to stop. But this environment change, you know, superintendent's questioning, like, you know, but this environment change. We'll talk in your office on Monday. But Dad's environment was moving, his change was moving to North Dakota.
And leaving all my friends, my musician friends, you know, people, I had friends that owned bars, and just cutting that off and coming here and starting to go to Evangel. I mean, that was a radical thing for us. But I always thought when I was Cory's age, 38 now, 38, that I'm gonna quit, no problem, he's not gonna see this, because I'm gonna quit. Next thing I knew, I was 60, and, you know, and he was married, and I still had to quit, and we never talked, we talked more than my dad and I did about the effects of alcohol, and why don't you stop that type of family dynamic, the drinking, and we just never did. Dad and I never did. So you and I doing it has really been a big help for both of us. But knowing that you're quitting that, your kids aren't gonna see you drinking and carrying that on through their life. That's a big thing for me.
I remember you saying, we were talking about this, you were loading the moving van and having a drink.
Yeah.
You know, just right up until that day.
Yeah.
And understand, like I mentioned, everything we still do, even together, whether it's playing music together, going out on the boat together, because we live up on the lake, everything reminds us of drinking. Yeah. Because for so long, those hobbies and those things that we did involved drinking. So everything we do, we think about drinking. It really is just this almost oppression in our life. But because we can talk about it now, we realize the damage it does, we realize there's a greater purpose to live for. Amen. And so it's incredible. And that's really the two takeaways from today for you to understand is teaching others and how to help someone that is struggling that might not realize it. And so really talk about family environments for a moment and helping someone who's struggling. Really, you have to educate yourself, which you're here, so thanks for being here. And this is something that's just not talked about. I think that's a big part of the problem, is it's just not talked about in families. You didn't talk about it with your dad. We didn't talk about it growing up.
We drank about it, not talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So teaching others about this, I have families, like I said, in our church that openly drink. They drank around me. One of them struggles with it. He's a younger guy with a family, and I've been over to his house before, and he was drunk, and his wife was out of town with the kids, and she called me to go check on him, and I broke into their house, and he was passed out on the couch, and I had to go to work the next day. I plugged his phone in, tried to wake him up, and couldn't, so I just stayed there with him. But I'm very open about my past, about all these things, and I want to help people understand the damage that it can bring. And so I talk about it whenever I can. I talk about it in our Connect groups. I talk about it in sermons I preach. I talk about it in classes, Bible studies that we teach at church. I'm just very open about it because I think not enough people are. And a big point, and you've all heard this quote, what you do in moderation, your kids will do in excess. That's where all of this starts. What you did, even though it was moderation, hiding it after work, I did in excess, big time after that. And so, that goes with everything. Drinking, even if it's a couple times a year. That goes with smoking. You mentioned your brother wasn't much of a drinker, the one that was adopted out, but he was a smoker.
Yep, smoked for a long time.
It goes with swearing. We've had a lot of conversations in our church lately about swearing. What you do in moderation, your kids do in excess. I remember not swearing growing up much and hiding it from you guys a lot, and then I just started swearing all the time. Hobbies, what you do in moderation, your kids do in excess. It's on the flip side of the coin that people don't talk about with this quote is reading your Bible all the time. What you do in moderation, your kids are going to do in excess, right? Serving the body of Christ, the church, your kids will do in excess. And so it's just something to remember with everything. What you do in moderation, what other people are doing in moderation, with their kids, other people will see and do it in excess. It also needs to be many conversations. It's not one and done. It's not, like, okay, we had this one conversation, you're good to go, right? And then never bringing it up again. Like, you have to talk about it. Many conversations. We can't shelter not only our kids anymore, but we can't shelter our congregation anymore from this. It is invading and flooding the church constantly, and it's just this secret. And so many churches and denominations allow it, and the pastors do it. It's just socially acceptable now. And so we need to talk about it. And this goes with so many things. Again, swearing, all this different stuff. Even the conversation we're having in our house right now is what movies we watch. Like, I don't want my kids watching all the stuff that I've seen in my life. But if they're seeing me constantly watching movies, they're going to do it in excess in their life. I grew up, part of our stories, they owned a video store much of my life before he was a mailman. We watched a lot of movies, and I saw a lot of things, and I still enjoy watching movies, but I have to be conscious what I'm doing in moderation. My kids will do in excess. My congregation, our church, will do in excess. So start talking about it and stop sweeping it under the rug. Start talking about it. Because of this social norm, we have to educate ourselves on this, and we have to educate others around us on this. And I talk about these things with my 9-year-old. My 9-year-old knows that my wife and I, her mom and I, have a past of struggling with alcohol. And now, she's so sweet. 9 years old, she sees somebody drinking or she hears somebody swearing, and she does this look like, they're a sinner, but she's 9. And so, and we've tried to teach her, these things, but we've openly had these conversations because I want her to know that our family has struggled with this for generations. And so I want her to understand our family struggles with this. We still struggle with the thought of it, the temptation of it. I could do it and nobody would know, superintendent would probably find out, but like this moment of, this moment of just educating her. And you could have my wife, opposite side. She had the perfect Christian upbringing. Her dad struggled with alcohol until he was 18, got called out on it because he was a preacher's kid, never did it again, never touched it. So she had a perfect environment growing up, but still ended up drinking and being an alcoholic and has done many drugs because they never had the conversation about it. They never talked about it. It was just shunned. because it's a sin. Don't do it. It's in the church. So
Sweep it under the rug.
talk about it constantly, and then helping others through this. A big part of it is changing their environment. Is changing, again, so many things: swearing, movies, alcohol. You have to change the environment, and if you want to see change in someone's environment, you have to get dirty and get involved in their life. Yeah. You can't change someone's environment with an hour on a Sunday morning. You can't change their environment and get involved in their life on, an hour small group with them. You have to get dirty, get messy.
It does help.
Which it does help.
Yeah.
But it comes down to this thing that the church talks about all the time, and it's discipleship. Discipleship is educating people in the things that you know and making more Christ-like people. People need you. Christians or not, people need you. And discipleship is just declining in the world. Morals are gone in the world. So you have to stand up for what is right. I love Philippians 2, 3, and 4, and then we'll do some Q&A. But it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Drinking is pretty selfish. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Value others. Get involved in their life. It says in verse 4, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Getting involved in someone else's life. And it's hard because it's a long process. Getting involved with people's lives, getting in the mess of their life, but the reward is eternal. The reward is eternal. And it says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. What did Christ do for us? He stepped off his throne, gave his life so that we could be set free and spend eternity with him, worshiping him. Christ gave his life, so why should we not give our life, our own selfish desires, to help others in that relationship with others? There's a good friend of mine, we'll call him Jake. He struggled with alcohol a lot, and this was very recently. I didn't even know it. And we talked together, and we were friends, and we'd talk on the phone, once a week, and we would do fasting together. Hey, let's do 21 days of water-only fast together. It was, accountability in these moments. And he was an alcoholic, and I had no idea. And he was a part of a great small group, and they had no idea about it. And he actually took the initiative himself to leave his job, to leave everything. He had a daughter, he's a single dad, and he checked himself into rehab. And he went through rehab completely because he realized what it was doing to his life. And when he got out of it, and we found out what had happened because he stopped answering my phone calls and ended up talking to his dad about it. But when he got out, we got together, got coffee, and I said, I had no idea. And he goes, the hardest part of being an alcoholic was the shame and the guilt that came from himself. He realized what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't stop. He said, I never wanted to tell anyone what I was dealing with. Even his small group he was a part of, his closest friends, could not bear the shame and guilt that came from just even admitting he had a problem with this. And so you never know. Someone might be an alcoholic. They might drink casually, what they say, but understand, their story is they are feeling shame and guilt through this. Morally, we know what's wrong, but it's really hard to pull yourself out of it. And that's why the church needs to step up and be the church and not only educate ourselves, but educate others on this and help others get involved in the nitty-gritty in life. That's what people did for me. That's what our family's done with you.
Yeah.
Mom. So
yeah, I left Washington with tons of friends. Most of them were drinkers. Came here, I don't have one friend that I can think of that drinks now. Everybody I know goes to church. All my friends in Garrison are members of the church. I mean, you talk about changing your environment. That was the best thing that could have happened to me. I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed there. Well, I do, because I've lost several of those musician friends from not only alcohol, but cocaine, methamphetamines, a couple heroin. I've lost a lot of friends to those things. And it starts, they used to say pot leads to worse drugs, hard drugs. And some of my friends, that's a bunch of baloney. Let's have some more acid tonight, and it does. It leads to harder stuff. And a lot of them didn't make it out of that. So environment, big thing. Talking about it, the other thing, yep.
And there's a whole side of this because of time we couldn't touch of, just the dependency on alcohol. The gentleman that I mentioned at the beginning that came into church drunk, he was fully dependent on alcohol. He could not function without drinking in the morning. He would shake. He had to have a couple drinks before he went to work. There are people that like that, and it is a struggle. And it's a part of our life that we haven't experienced. We could both function, but we still, I believe that we're alcoholics because we crave it. I still crave it to this day, and I know I can't do it. Not only because superintendent would fire me, but I can't do it in a sense. It would lead my life and my kids' life down that path that we have been trying to generationally break in this aspect. Yeah.
That's the key, that generational break that you're going to be doing that I wasn't able to do. My dad never talked about it. My brother never talked about it.
And talking about it, but also the environment. Might just be a couple drinks on the weekend. Parents are still giving permission to their kids. Hey, this is okay because I do it once in a while. And so you're still giving permission. We got about 15 or so minutes. Questions. I want to leave some time for questions. Because maybe you haven't sat in a room with somebody that struggled with this before. Maybe you have.
We never talked about it in our home because I was raised in a Christian home. We never talked about alcohol. It was taboo. Drugs were taboo. Swearing was taboo. If you did, you're going to hell. I have 2 sons who are, one's an alcoholic, one's a drinker. They both recovered, but they still struggle.
Still struggle, yeah.
And we never talked about it. That was just, you didn't do that.
Yeah.
And back in those days, I assume you're younger than I am.
I don't count on that.
I had to get out of that real fast there. But back in those days, and with our parents, right, you didn't talk about that kind of stuff. Teenage pregnancy, you didn't talk about that kind of stuff. Alcohol, drugs weren't as prevalent, but they were around in those days. And it's hurt so many people because of that. Just think if they had talked about that. Of course, it's a struggle to get someone in your family to talk about that. It really is. And the further I get away from that environment, and the further I get away from the drinking and drugs, the easier it has become, but it's always there. It's always there in the back of your mind. And yeah, if I went back to Washington and met up with my old buddies, or California, would I fall back into that? That's not gonna happen because we live in Garrison now. But if I did, I don't know.
Well,
I would
have
like to think
say
it
that
would.
our one son and his son were just baptized here.
Awesome. Praise God. Yes.
I have so just practically speaking, somebody comes into your church, drunk, whatever, what are some practical resources in small town, we're from Beulah, so our issue is cause we work with people in recovery too, and it's well there's a 6-month waiting list to get in the Heartview.
Right.
Where do you send them? How do you help them on a practical level just to work with the dependency?
That is a great question. And I probably don't have an answer for you right now. Being in Garrison 5 years now, like you said, there's just nowhere. The one gentleman that I mentioned at the beginning, he ended up going to the Catholic church, and they had a place for him to stay and sober up all the time. And he became a Catholic. Well, and then as soon as he got out of that environment, went back to his apartment, relapsed again, and got right back into that environment. But having a change of environment, and so the few times we've dealt with this in Garrison, I have gotten involved heavily and talked to family members, cousins, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, whoever I can, to just get them out of Garrison. And I've talked to superintendent, it's hey, a teen challenge, I've called teen challenge, trying to get them, and then we just raise money to try and help them get them there in that sense. But because it's socially acceptable, it is extremely hard to get somebody to stop these and get out of that environment, because everyone around them is saying it's okay, it's okay, and they're not verbally saying it's okay. They're saying, because, oh, I'm gonna go to the bar. Well, you just gave permission to go to the bar. So I know I didn't answer your question.
No.
But, we try to involve as much as we can in their life and their family's life, and just helping them, remove them from the situation, and then following up. Oh man, we don't just like kick them out of Garrison and never talk to him again. This gentleman, we just can't get hold of him. But yeah. Yes, sir.
You talk about removing yourself from the environment, but now it is so socially acceptable that you can't get out of the environment of your family, you know? And it is so socially acceptable and a moderation term that they just don't know how to even address it. You're talking, you know, and there's lots of Christian homes. I mean, I grew up Lutheran, my wife Catholic, those worlds, that was also acceptable. It wasn't until we got saved and it was like, so it was God is absent, you know, and so that's where we've been. But it's like, how do you, when it is a family, any recommendations of when they don't know how to talk about it or don't want to talk about it, or it's just like what's that called, where you spin the gun? Russian roulette. You just hope nothing happens, and they all have stories that, oh yeah, my uncle died from it, my brother, you know, that's my life and my family, you know, never did, but we all have people that we know.
Everybody knows somebody, for sure.
And even in your own family, you know, my father, brother, uncle, you know. My concern was that we grew up 3 generations, and there were drinkers I figured out by the end of my life, but there was never, for 3 generations, there was never, ever alcohol at anything we came together with family, never. My grandparents' side, my uncles and aunts' side, my side, my brothers and sisters' side, but now, you know, it generates that culture of acceptance, and it's just like, somebody's gonna get hurt in this moderation excess. It's just,
It's a dreaded conversation.
Oh,
approaching somebody like, hey, can we talk about your drinking?
No, I'm not drinking too much.
Right. Nobody wants to hear, because of pride, that they have a problem, that they struggle with
so
something.
you have a problem. I mean, you know, I worry that the grandchildren see the grandparents.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just like, I don't think you really realize what permissions you're giving them.
Completely.
And that's my concern.
That's something I hadn't thought about till he said that. We were talking about the other day, and he said, by you drinking, even though you were hiding it, you weren't giving it to us, you're still giving him permission to drink. It must be okay. Mom and Dad are doing it. You don't realize how much influence you have over your kids, you know, when they see you doing something. Man.
And I've mentioned it before, like, longer ago, our daughter's 9, and I think I've mentioned a few times, like, I don't want you guys drinking around her, because then she's gonna see that.
Right.
And that kind of sparked a conversation between us and our family of, well, what do you mean? You know, so I wasn't necessarily coming to you and saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
I was concerned for my daughter and her future, and her seeing her grandma and grandpa do it, just like you had mentioned, Superintendent, and that was my concern. And I think that broke down a barrier between us, in a sense of, there's a concern here. I'm not coming to you saying you have a problem. I have a concern for your grandkids.
And Janice and I talked about it and realized that, yeah, we did have a couple of beers on the boat a few times, you know? And it's so easy to just jump right back. We're going boating, I'm going to the liquor store. It's just in your head, you know?
Yeah,
And
it's a mindset that's just there.
but now we just do not do it at all. That's the only way you can completely get away from it, is just no matter what you do.
And it's so easy to get back into it. Oh, is it ever easy? I've talked to Pastor Josh about this many times. I think I've mentioned it to you, Superintendent, but I was between ministry roles for a season, and between youth pastor here and Garrison, I had a year off, and I struggled because I felt like God called me to do something else, but we didn't know what it was. And I drank for 9 months because I just didn't know how to process what God was trying to speak to me, and I felt like I couldn't talk about it with anybody. Like, we just left ministry, and because we felt like God was just done with us. And so my wife and I just got right back into drinking. And my environment, because I went to landscaping, all those guys I worked with drank after work. There was beer the owner put in the fridge, and he was a Christian, and he would buy beer for his workers, and and it was just this like environment, and just fell instantly back into it. And then realizing through more conversations, like, oh my gosh, it just happened, and I didn't even intentionally do it. And then I had to get out of that as fast as I could and change my environment again. I couldn't be in that because it's such a temptation. I could not be in that environment because I had almost no self-control over it. I just couldn't do it anymore. Now, hindsight, that was 6 years ago, but hindsight, I'm like, I can, not that I'm going to put myself in that environment, but if I happen to be in that environment, I know through grace that I have self-control
You know
through
to
that
guard
now.
against
I
it.
know now because I'm educated. We've talked about it. My wife and I have talked about it. We've taught it at our church. Just the dependency of alcohol in this. I know now, hindsight, not to get back into that. But any other questions? I like to be on time with things, so except for church. Preachers, right? But any other questions? Yes.
She go ahead.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say, like, I grew up in a small town, and just even that, I don't know if it's permission or just for high schoolers, like, parents would throw the grad parties
Mhm.
and, supply
Oh, big
things.
time.
And so,
We
do you
lived
find,
that.
yeah, do you find, like with youth up there, like, a lot of conversations that you have to have, just to talk like that?
Yes.
To him, I said, if you ever get in trouble, don't be driving and, drinking, or your friends. And a few times you guys called Mom and I, and I don't care what time it is, you go pick them up but yeah, when you're giving that permission, I gotta admit, we did that, and it was, we were so lucky that somebody didn't get hurt.
Lucky thing.
What?
Lucky thing.
We were fortunate that somebody didn't get,
God knew.
yeah, when I was 17, I rode down a mountain 5 times with my buddies in a car. Luckily nobody got killed, but we were drinking, driving around the mountains at 2 o'clock in the morning. Thank goodness, well, we kinda took your keys away, but still, that doesn't really stop that.
Justify.
It just justify it.
Yeah, our rule was, if you guys are gonna drink, at least do it in the house. And so all my friends we just had the party house in school. But to answer your question, I have a lot of conversations with our youth up in Garrison, and I coach baseball. I have conversations with our baseball team because they all drink. The grad parties are a big one. I remember a lot 2 years ago. A couple of our students really struggled with drinking and sneaking booze from their parents and at the grad parties and finishing everything off, and there was conversations. And I tried to do it in such a way where there's no condemnation, but they know they can always call me and they can rely on me, and I will not judge them for it. I will talk to them about it and just sharing my experience with it and my upbringing. But they know, like, oh, Cory's not holier than thou. Like, he's a regular guy that has struggled with this. And so I've tried to keep an open door and that's with everybody, an open door to talk about it, to be a reliable person for that. Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I almost forgot about your question.
That's okay, and I don't know if you can necessarily answer this, so one of the things we run into is when we're working with people, like alcohol is kind of like the cardinal sin you cannot serve at our church. Like, I'm not talking our church, but like you can't serve in the church because you got the sin you're dealing with.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like dream team member, whatever you wanna call it. So
Yeah,
you have to sign this thing that says you're not gonna drink, and so we've worked really hard with people, and they won't sign the thing, and they end up like leaving the church because it's like they've just been shamed right back into the thing.
Sure.
And so like, I was just wondering if your church had some sort of policy, or like we even had a girl on our the worship team with me. She literally came camping with us because she wanted to stay sober so bad to
Wow.
sing with me on Sunday, and we kept her there. But that was like kind of like her serving in our church was what was keeping her sober for that period of time. But
Wow.
does your church have like some sort of stance, or how do you work with people? Cause you also don't wanna give people permission, you know, like if you're opening the door of your church and smoking a cigarette, like that's not great.
Right.
That's giving people permission, but like where's the line, and does your church have a policy on it?
So yeah, two parts. Our current policy, anyone in leadership, like you have to abstain from it because you are in leadership in the church. So I have a team that works under me of volunteers called coordinators, and they have signed something that says they will not drink. And if I find out about it and it's happened, we've had some hard conversations and working through that, but they understand that I've struggled with it, and I understand that I've struggled with it, you know, even as a Christian. But then we are adopting a new policy for onboarding Dream Teamers that talks about this topic. And I think because it's been like several years ago, you just didn't talk about sex in church at all. You know, you just didn't, you shunned from talking about it. And now it's that way with alcohol. It's become so socially acceptable that we don't need to talk about it. And because it's such a problem, people think they don't need to talk about it. And so we are working on a policy right now for our Dream Teamers, not just onboarding to get somebody standing at the door, because we need bodies. We want, as a part of discipleship, in onboarding team members. So it's a very new thing that's happened within the
You can't
last.
disciple them if you're throwing them out the door before they get started.
Yeah.
You have to-
Exactly. So we don't want just bodies at the door or serving coffee. We want people being discipled, and the church has done a terrible job in general of just, well, we need greeters, we need this, you know, so we're just gonna get people there and not actually, and then 30 years later they've served in the same position their entire life and nobody ever addressed, are they actually being discipled?
Right.
So yeah, we can totally connect more about this after.
I was just thinking to add on to that's something that we've struggled with in our church, especially like youth ministry with our leaders, is because if there is one thing that I have that I hold my youth leaders to is an adamant no drinking. And I probably lose 4 leaders to every one that commits because of that stance.
Sure.
And for the longest time, I even went to my lead pastor and just said, do I need to like get rid of this rule because I'm losing potential leaders, and it's kind of frustrating. And again, he just encouraged and said, if that's where you're standing and that's your integrity as the leader of that group, stick with it. And so one thing that I try to do is when I sit down with potential youth leaders is I often go down socially acceptable, kind of not really, it's a gray area in the Bible, but I often go down the process of trying to explain to them why that is my rule. And especially for teenagers, number one, obviously they're not legal to drink it, so there's that rule. But at the same time, it's like with the permission giving, I don't want you as a leader to be the crutch as to why they fell down that road because they walked into the local restaurant and saw you with a beer in front of you. They don't know if that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have no idea. All it is permission for them to do it. And that's what's hard is I said, you may have control. You may not, it's not a problem for you, but they don't know that. They don't. And so I've had some pretty tough conversations with them, and I've lost a lot of potential great leaders because of that. But I've tried my best to even just have that conversation with them so they know my heart and where I'm coming from as to obviously the next generation and protecting that next generation. Now, as far as serving in other areas of ministry, I'm not really sure, how Pastor Sheldon would handle that. But I know that that's one of the struggles that I've had with finding youth leaders for our youth group and losing a lot of potential youth leaders is because that is the one non-negotiable that I have.
Completely.
And that could extend to a lot of things, sexual immorality, drugs, anything and everything that falls under this category of what we're doing in secret.
What they're watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's trying to hold them to an accountability. And that's difficult because again, then we can get to a place of legalism that we don't want to.
Right.
But at the same time, when we're talking about the next generation, I feel like there is kind of a hard line of this is what it is. And if you can explain that the best you can in love and say, hey, when we're looking at the next generation and leading them, this is the standards we wanna hold to.
Right.
But that was something I struggled with for years, just, I feel like I'm losing great potential leaders, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. But then again, when we're looking at, like you keep talking about and just keep sharing with us, is the permission that we're giving. And that, when it comes down to it, my conviction is I do not want to ever, I don't wanna stand before the Lord and say,
Right.
hey, I'm sorry, I guess I gave permission when I shouldn't have.
Mhm.
And so it's an always, they're always watching, they're always watching everything we do.
Always watching.
Yeah.
Always.
You think they don't see, but they do.
Being above reproach is what I do come back to. That
Yeah.
scripture that says, be above reproach. Shouldn't us as the church be above reproach? We shouldn't conform to the ways of the world, but we should hold a line of morals, and it's only gonna get worse, right? It's not gonna get easier. It's only gonna get worse. But that is 5:16. If you have any more questions, available. Like I said, my email address is up here, so we can talk more on the phone. But thanks everybody for coming.